In Sachen Demokratie rangiert Kolumbien laut dem anerkannten Demokratieindex vom Economist auf einer Ebene mit Frankreich und den USA, knapp unterhalb von Deutschland. Und seit dem Friedensvertrag mit der FARC im Jahr 2016 erfreut sich Kolumbien einer stetig steigenden Zahl von Urlaubern und Geschäftsreisenden. Heute Abend gestattet uns der anwesende Regisseur Markus Schroeder einen neuen Blick in die sehr komplexe Realität Kolumbiens, wo das menschliche Zusammenwirken einem großen Experiment unterzogen wird. Menschen, die jahrzehntelang Teil eines grausamen bewaffneten Konflikts gewesen sind, müssen nun lernen, wie man gegenseitige Ressentiments überwindet und Vorbehalte abbaut, während an anderen Orten desselben Landes noch die Waffen sprechen. Es ist, wie wir in den kommenden 80 Minuten circa sehen werden, ein langer und mühsamer Weg voller Gefahren. Bleiben Sie trotzdem auf Ihren Stühlen sitzen, denn nach dem Dokumentarfilm werden Sie Gelegenheit haben, sowohl den Regisseur Markus Schroeder als auch den Produzenten des Films, Gerardo Chapa, kennenzulernen und unsere Fragen zu stellen. Wir danken euch beiden, Markus y apreciado Gerardo, dass ihr den spannenden Eröffnungsfilm zu unserer Iberoamerikanischen Kinowoche liefert und uns mit eurer Anwesenheit heute beehrt. Vielen, vielen Dank. Ein besonderer Dank gilt auch dem Team vom Instituto Cervantes unter der Leitung von Carlos Ortega und seiner Kulturbeauftragten Isabel Navarro. Eure Initiative und Organisationen haben diese zweite Aufnahme möglich gemacht. Nun aber Film ab. Aber ich komme erstmal zu dir, Markus. Du stammst aus Kulmbach. Ab 2006 hast du einige Jahre in Argentinien gelebt, wo du dein Studium an der Filmhochschule abgeschlossen hast. Und außerdem lerntest du auch deine Frau dort kennen. Und mit ihr lebtest du anschließend 10 Jahre in London. Jetzt lebt ihr mit euren Kindern wieder in deiner alten Heimat, im bayerischen Kulmbach. Lange Zeit machtest du Werbefilme, Musikvideos. Doch dann hast du dich mehr und mehr für die Dokumentationen begeistert. Zu dir, Gerardo, auf Deutsch. Du stammst aus Mexiko, lebtest aber schon immer in den USA und nun in Madrid. Bevor du El Gigante Dormido produziert hast, produziertest du bereits die Doku, Gerardo, ich spreche über dich, über den World Cup in Südafrika. In der Hauptsache arbeitest du für die National Football League der Amerikaner und deshalb wart ihr gestern beide auch in Frankfurt bei dem großen Footballspiel. Du bringst uns Europäern und auch den Südamerikanern in Mexiko bringst du die amerikanische Football näher. Wegen deiner Sport-Connections kamst du dann auch auf die Idee, dass ihr beide einen Film zur Reintegration der FARC machen solltet, denn der Friedensplan sah vor, wie aus dem Film hervorgehen, vielleicht nicht ganz klar, aber doch einigermaßen, dass die FARC einen Verein in der kolumbianischen Liga erhalten sollte. Dazu kam es aber nicht. Im El Gigante Dormido behandelt ihr beide ein sehr brisantes Thema mit hoher Aktualität, nämlich die enormen Hindernisse und Bemühungen auf dem Weg zu einer Reintegration ehemaliger FARC-Kämpfer in Kolumbien. Markus, du hast sowohl das Drehbuch geschrieben als auch Regie geführt. Dabei zeichnest du das Bild zweier sehr unterschiedlicher FARC-Führer auf eine so sensible Weise, dass es einem leicht fällt, sich mit der jeweiligen Lage und den Zweifeln von Pedro und Eduardo, so heißen ja die beiden, zu identifizieren, erstaunlicherweise. Hier kommt meine erste Frage an euch beide und ihr könnt sie euch aufteilen und gegenseitig die Bälle zu schmeißen. Im Publikum sind auch viele Leute, die Spanisch und Englisch verstehen. how did you get to know Eduardo and Pedro?
So basically we started with a completely different set of characters. And when he suggested the project to me in London, sounded really great, really interesting, this football project that he's talking about. 1 week later I was in Bogota. It went really quick, so quite exciting, and I was being led to a secret house somewhere in Bogota, lots of bodyguards in front, and I met like some of the old leaders of the FARC, namely also a guy called Walter, and we started with a whole different set of characters in that sense, who, it turned out when the football project disappeared, a lot of these guys that we started with went back to arms. You know about the dissidents? So a lot of those guys just, we tried to meet them again, and it became weirder and weirder. And it became like very difficult to meet them, and we like already sensed that something is going on, and then it became more obvious why this is all happening, because at some point we realized that they're part of the dissidents. So in that process we talked to journalists from Bogota. There was one journalist, specifically a periodista, called Isabella, and she had a really good contact to Pedro, and she introduced us. So it was really like an arranged meeting. So like I flew to Medellin. I think I met him in Medellin. Also again, like, you have to go to this address and meet him. But you can see how he is, no? Like his character, he kind of liked the thing that we're gonna do something about him. He still likes it. Yeah. So that was, at the beginning it was a bit difficult, but at the same time it was also playing in our hands because he liked it. And Eduardo, to be honest, was a bit different, because this guy Walter Mendoza, who then became a dissident and is now back to arms with the dissidents of the FARC, they invited us to the La Vida zone, that zone where Eduardo is. And then obviously, once you meet Eduardo, I mean, he's just an incredible guy, incredible character. Once he talks, you just want to listen to what he says. Although some of it is quite controversial. I mean, I have to say, some of his opinions I don't necessarily agree with, but I really like listening to him, and he's an interesting guy, so he became quite obvious as a character very quickly, I think. I guess.
Yeah, very interesting character, the two of them. It seems that you started quite early with this project. I mean, the peace treaty was signed in 2016, and then it seems you started right away in 2017, or when did you start? Because you saw already the election of Duque, who stayed as a president for 4 years, and then you got even to see Pedro. He has been president for less than 2 years, 1.5 years or so.
Exactly. I think.
Yes. Well, the fact that it starts with the election of Duque and ends with the election of Pedro was a nice coincidence, because of course there was a pandemic in the middle that complicated us following the stories in a more chronological and consistent way. But yeah, we started, the initial access was given to us in 2017. So the peace deal was very fresh, and that's why there was this optimism, especially in the Western media. And when there was news of this football project, everyone picked it up. So that access started right in 2017, and as Markus said, from the moment that we saw a window to access the zones to actually being physically there, maybe 2 weeks passed, because we knew we had to seize the opportunity. And so that was 2017. We didn't really start properly filming what ended up in the film until 2018, which is the election of Duque, as you mentioned. And then of course we were there for a good part of 2018, a little bit of 19, but then 2020 and 21 were...
I hope it's not repetitive, but it was definitely getting the trust, like gaining the access to talk to them freely, because as Gerardo already mentioned, is like at the beginning they were really, like party line, they were like talking the same things over and over, and it sounded like, I was doing 3 interviews, and I'm like, this was basically the same interview, and then the challenge was to get behind that kind of layer of trust that they didn't give us, because they had so much distrust to the media, and especially in Colombia, the media were always against them. The media were often very state influenced, and they were extremely dubious about us. So they were like, oh, these journalists. So, for example, one story that I like to tell, because it was quite an experience, was that when this whole football thing disappeared and we couldn't really get behind this layer, we decided that I will stay 1 week in Quibdó, where Pedro lived at the time, and my crew, Chapa, the cameraman, the sound guy, and our executive producer Moritz, they went to Bogota to film something else. So I stayed 1 week with Pedro, and every evening I went like with a bunch of beers and like a pack of cigarettes, because they smoked a lot. Went to his house and just like started talking to him. And I wish like the camera would have been there, because that's when he talked about all the anecdotes from the war and stuff, which he avoided telling too much on camera. But which was also good, because I always thought like, what is one anecdote, you know? Like it's about different themes in the film. So, yeah.
Have you ever received any threats from any people?
Not directly.
Not directly. Okay, no, okay.
Not yet.
You felt quite safe during the process?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily safe.
Yeah, but it wasn't like scary or anything. It was okay, I guess.
Did you receive some support from other people? I mean, has there been any organization that assisted you in realizing this project? Have you done it all on your own without any support?
Well, in terms of the security element, Marcus said he wasn't scared, I was. I think there were definitely moments when we realized, and you see it for a short moment when Pedro takes off his shirt at the waterfall, you know, he's wearing a bulletproof vest, and he has bodyguards, and he has a coche blindado, and we were just in a normal rental car, following him everywhere. So that's what was scary to us, was that we knew he was a target of the paramilitaries, and in a crossfire anything could happen. But in terms of being afraid of the members of the FARC themselves, that was never a threat at all. But I would say that the car rides, more than anything, was where we felt like, okay, they're protected, but we're not.
But, I mean, just to elaborate a little bit on it, like, for example, just to explain a little bit how it was, there was no direct threat, but one of the, so you see, Pedro's always with these guys, right? These young guys. They're his bodyguards, and they're the Unidad Nacional de Producción, UNP. The Kolumbians will know what it is, because it was guaranteed in the peace process, and they were supposed to be made up of ex-FARC combatants and policemen, military, ex-military and stuff. But the FARC kind of bullied the other guys out so much that now it's all ex-FARC, basically. So it's like all his old crew, all his guys, and they're all like a little bit like dudes, you know? And then they just come up to us.
They gangsters.
A little bit like, they're all like, also they're very young, you know? They're all a bit like, and they just came up to us like, hey, don't worry, the next 1 hour and a half going through these mountain roads, really remotely in the jungle, it's just gonna go really fast. Why? Because it's paramilitary, like a strong paramilitary area. So this is the kind of threat that was there. Like then you sit in the car, like, and it's going through these roads, and you feel a bit nervous. I mean, I was nervous.
I was just looking at Google Maps to see how quickly we were getting.
So yeah.
Well, thank you. May I pass the
Yes.
word to the audience?
Yes, okay. One question again about Pedro. He seems like such a nice and friendly guy, but was there one moment that I saw his eyes and I always thought, what did he saw in his life? You were scared in some moment of Pedro?
I don't think you want to be on the wrong side of him. Like, I think if there's this moment in the film which I really like, I don't know, you're the audience, so I don't know how it comes across, but after this discussion about the closure of the integration zone, when he talks to this one guy who's this idealist, very theoretical guy who is a bit up in the clouds and doesn't really talk about the reality of things. I always like when he says, we're trying to do so much for you, and Pedro, this is the moment when you like see, like, he looks at him and like, I don't have any problem with you personally, but as entities, many problems. And when he walks away, I can see his head going like he's a scary guy. I mean, yeah, he is a scary guy, I guess. I mean, I don't know what he's seen in his life. One story that we completely omitted from the film, also because I thought it would make it too much about his personal trauma, which would deflect from a lot of the issues that we actually wanted to talk about, which is how can war reconcile and all that, is that his father killed his mom when he was 10 years old or 11 years old, and he found the mom like stabbed up, and then a few years later he joined the FARC. You know, like, he has seen a lot of stuff in his life. Like, it's crazy. Actually, it's crazy that he's holding it all up together. But I guess he's the character for me that he will always keep fighting. You know, like even at the end when Eduardo breaks up and he says, "We didn't achieve our goal and that hurts." I think Pedro would never say that in his whole life. He will always twist it in a way that he will say, whatever happened to us, he will always spin it so he can continue. And I think it's very machista, very, very male view of things. And I think if he ever admitted to the failure, I think everything will fall apart for him. Like, so that's my view of his character.
I was afraid of Pedro at the beginning, not of him harming us, but of his temper, because we knew that he had an objective. He is a very shrewd propagandist, I think, and what Markus was speaking to earlier about having to penetrate that political persona. We knew that if our interest didn't align with his, or at least if we didn't try to make him think that our interests were aligned, he could at any moment cut it off, and he did show signs of being annoyed or even angry with us. So that's kind of what I feared more than his, any sort of violence. But as Markus was saying, that political persona, we tried to overcome it for a long time, but we realized there's an earnestness to that. It's not just a show, because it's also strategic. If he ever gives up that persona, everyone who's behind him, who's already doubting, or who might have a little bit of doubt, would immediately, would leave the peace accords. They would go back to arms or join a dissident gang. So it's coming from a place of honesty.
Thank you. Very interesting analysis.
Eduardo, as an ex-commander, could have bodyguards, and he could have the same as escoltas, bodyguards, as Pedro, and well, he never goes in cars anyway, but he could have an armored car and all that, like Pedro has, but he refuses to do so because he was urban intelligence, clandestine urban intelligence, so he's like, I move myself like this. So he's a bit proud of this kind of way of life. We saw Pedro last week. We went to a film festival in Mexico City, and it was quite interesting because the embassy of Colombia in Mexico has invited Pedro as a special guest to that festival for our film. And so Pedro has left Colombia for the first time in his whole life, because he only got a passport 2 years ago, right? And they've actually just been struck off the terror lists of FBI and CIA 2 years ago. So he couldn't have traveled in any way before that, but it was kind of cool to be in that situation, right? And then, yeah, he says it's getting a little bit better with Pedro, But in general, I don't know how many Colombians are here, but in general, it looks like, from what I'm hearing, is the situation is going downhill quite a lot. A lot of the places that we visited, for example, I've heard that there's just no way we could go back there. Like Belén de Bajera is completely under control of cartel, Clan de Golfo, which is a big cartel basically. A lot of the places are under control of the paramilitaries. And this is one aspect that really failed in the peace process, because one part of the peace process, and I think it's mentioned in the film, Eduardo says it, I think, is that all, like in the peace process, it was promised that these places get taken over by the state, get infrastructure, which is why this is all happening in the first place, right? It's like these places were so lost. Being there, and understanding the geography of Colombia, it becomes quite apparent actually why this is all happening. And then, so this hasn't obviously been fulfilled, and now a lot of the places that have been under FARC control, and this is a very controversial thing if there's any Colombians here, but like it might have been better under the FARC, because at least they were not as cruel as the cartels and the paramilitaries. So for me, it's more dangerous now than before.
Interesting.
For the local population, at least.
Interesting. Please.
Have you found?
Sorry. And so, it's about the women in the movie. So the FARC always tries to present itself as a very feminist organization. They actually, when the peace process happened, most of the articles that I saw in international media were about like the women soldiers of the FARC, how they're like so feminist and stuff, but the reality was absolutely not. It was quite machista, I would say, and the women were really in the back. So it's almost like a decision that we didn't try to show it in a different way, because nowadays it would have been better to, from a filmmaker's perspective, it would have been better to show the role of the woman in the FARC, but for me, I didn't see any of it. So it's just the depiction of reality, I would say. I didn't see any role of them.
Un segundo, el señor de allá, por favor.
Could I ask you to reflect a bit more on your role as an outsider coming into a conflict that is very heavy?
Actually, you know, we talked a lot about the access and the trust. Being a foreigner in Colombia was very beneficial. So who helped a lot in the peace process were the Norwegians, and they had generally a very favorable, the FARC had a really favorable view of Europeans in general, because of what we talked about earlier, like the Colombian media was really against them. Like one guy told, I can't remember who, but one guy told us, I gave this interview and I talked about all this, and then I read the article that they wrote and it was completely different. Like it was not what I said, and it was completely like propagandistic almost. So at the beginning it was always that issue, and I think being foreigners, they open up a lot more to us in the first place.
The mix of nationalities we had in the project was actually quite a beneficial, quite an asset, because as Markus said, while they were more suspicious of Colombians than of outsiders, we did have one member of the team who was Colombian, and his knowledge of the conflict, he was actually the cinematographer, was invaluable in terms of guiding us, telling us, you know, the level of risk of certain situations, certain just cues and things that even as a native Spanish speaker, for me from Mexico, is not wasn't obvious. So I think having one Colombian on the team but not being all Colombian was kind of the perfect mix in a way.
Thank you. Juan Pablo.
No, solo una preguntita, perdón. Ustedes llevamos hablando sobre los dos caracteres principales de la película, pero hay otros dos protagonistas adicionales que también se exponen puntos de vista. Sí, puntos de vista. El señor Eder, me parece, ¿no? El nombre. Se me hizo muy lógico a través de toda su explicación. ¿Qué nos comenta de él?
So Edad, he's a very interesting personality, and one aspect that I need to mention now, which 1 week ago, I think last Sunday, he was elected mayor of Cali. So that is quite interesting. So 2 of our characters now became quite important politicians in the Colombian landscape, political landscape. So Edad, for me, he was just the counterpoint in our story. So, if we would not include Edad in Calderon, the sports commentator and author that's in the movie, I just felt it would become like too on the FARC side, and we wouldn't hear about all the things that they've done. And for me, it was just the way to include all these things in the movie. Although in the end, it plays a little bit in both ways, because when Edad says, of course, some of them are killed. I mean, I don't know. For a European mindset, that's not something I would say. Like, even if I thought like that, I would never express that. But he, as a politician, he just felt comfortable to say that on camera, you know, like, I found it quite strong. Like,
But on that, Pedro is a politician.
Pedro's now a politician too, yeah.
Exactly, and I mean, and he says, and the other one, Eduardo, as well, and they say, well, collateral damage, that's part of their propaganda, excuse me.
But I think it's absolutely to be criticized. I don't think that's
That
good.
point of view, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, but I think that's
No, I mean,
very valid to say.
You're documenting it, yeah, but it's propagandistic in what they express. It's, to me, stunning. Yeah, nothing else.
Nevertheless,
But I think
it's
it's
showing both sides, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to comment that it's not necessarily our job as filmmakers to overlay a commentary on that point of view, because you yourself saw it for what it was.
Worse than Eduardo saying collateral damage, for me the worst moment is when Pedro doesn't accept his responsibility. That for me is key, and I agree with you. He just says, I wasn't responsible. But for us, it was just important to show it, you know?
Yes. No, I have a feeling that it's not your point of view, of course, but I have the feeling that the FARC was not so honest with the public. They make also a charade. They really don't tell you what is in their minds. And LEL is also a revolutionary army, but 2 days ago kidnapped the father of a football player. So it's all, for me, it's, you know, it's very nice what you show in the film, and it is very interesting to tell the people how it's working, the peace agreement. But for us as Colombian, that is also a charade. We can not believe in the FARC. It is naive.
Thank you. So we're in the middle of the discussion, and that is absolutely, these are the points of view, the existing points of view, and we saw them in the film as well.
And ultimately, we didn't have a strong point of view at the time as it was unfolding. So anything they would have asked us, you know, even between the team, there were some who were more sympathetic to the FARC, there were some who were less, like me. But at no point did we, because initially, as we said, it was a sports movie, and it was meant to have a happy ending, or at least an ending that was win or lose on the pitch, not, you know, live or die. So, you know, as the project was unfolding, any sort of conversations we had about it were not really tied to what the final product was, because it was unfolding in front of us.
Markus and Gerardo, I must
Did you get the signal?
thank you very much for this fantastic film and for your presence and for the answers that you gave to the audience. Thank you so much for being here with us in Hamburg. I've learned tremendously much about Colombia and the own people. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.